72 hours ago, Benjamin Netanyahu appeared briefly on Israeli state television to deliver a pre-recorded statement about the ongoing military operations in Lebanon. He looked tired. His speech was slightly slower than his usual cadence. The statement lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. And, since that moment, the man who has dominated Israeli politics for longer than any leader in the country's history, the man whose personal decisions have shaped the most consequential military escalation cycle in the Middle East since 1973, has not been seen in public. No press appearances, no emergency addresses, no social media activity from his verified accounts, no photographs. His office has issued 2 written statements in the intervening period, both attributed to unnamed senior staff, both addressing operational military matters in language so generic it could have been produced by any communications officer in any government anywhere. The Israeli Prime Minister's office has not confirmed his location. It has not confirmed his health status. It has not confirmed that he is conducting the business of government. And in the vacuum created by that silence, a video emerged. And that video has now been seen by 40 million people. Before explaining what the video shows and what it does not show, it is necessary to establish the context in which it appeared, because context is everything when evaluating material that circulates at this speed, with this level of political consequence, and with this many actors who have strong incentives to shape how it is interpreted. The video was first posted to a Telegram channel with approximately 800,000 subscribers that describes itself as providing unfiltered intelligence on the Israeli-Iranian conflict. The channel has no identified ownership, no editorial accountability, and a history of posting material that is sometimes accurate, sometimes misleading, and occasionally fabricated. This does not mean the video is false. It means that the provenance of the video, the chain of custody between the moment it was recorded and the moment it appeared on that Telegram channel, is entirely unverified. What the video shows is a figure matching Netanyahu's physical description in what appears to be a medical facility connected to monitoring equipment, in a state that the people who have watched it 40 million times have variously described as unconscious, sedated, post-surgical, or simply sleeping in a chair. The image quality is poor, the lighting is institutional, the duration is 47 seconds, and Israeli authorities have said absolutely nothing about it. The silence from Jerusalem is itself the most significant data point in this entire situation, and it requires careful analysis rather than simple interpretation. There are 3 categories of explanation for why the Israeli Prime Minister's office has not issued a clear, direct, unambiguous statement confirming Netanyahu's health and current operational status. The first explanation is the most reassuring and, in normal circumstances, the most likely. The government has made a calculated decision that engaging with unverified social media content legitimizes it, and that a denial issued in response to a viral Telegram video gives the video more credibility than it deserves by treating it as something worth denying. This is a standard communication strategy employed by governments around the world, and it has genuine logic behind it. When you deny something, you confirm that people should be asking the question. The second explanation is significantly more concerning. Netanyahu has experienced a medical event of some kind, not necessarily life-threatening, but serious enough that his condition cannot currently be publicly presented in a way that would maintain confidence in his capacity to govern during the most acute military crisis Israel has faced in 50 years. The third explanation, which intelligence analysts are taking seriously, even if mainstream media has been reluctant to engage with it directly, is that the security situation around Netanyahu has become so severe, given the direct Iranian targeting of Israeli leadership infrastructure that has been a documented element of IRGC operational planning, that his location and status are being actively concealed as a force protection measure. Let us examine each of these explanations against the available evidence. The communication strategy explanation, that silence is a deliberate choice to avoid amplifying misinformation, becomes significantly weaker when you apply it to the specific circumstances of a wartime prime minister whose country is simultaneously managing active military operations on 5 fronts, whose closest ally is deciding whether to conduct large-scale strikes on Iranian territory, and whose war cabinet is making decisions that affect the lives of millions of people. In a crisis of this magnitude, the absence of visible leadership is not a neutral communications choice. It is a vacuum that adversaries, allies, and domestic political opponents will all fill with their own narratives. Israel's closest ally, the United States, requires visible, functioning leadership in Jerusalem to justify the political cost of continued military and diplomatic support. If the Secretary of State is trying to coordinate a response to the Ford strike with the Israeli Prime Minister's office and getting written statements from unnamed staff, rather than direct communication with the Prime Minister himself, that is not merely a communications issue. It is a strategic liability of the first order. A government that chose silence as a deliberate strategy in these circumstances would be making an extraordinary gamble that the cost of the vacuum is lower than the cost of disclosure. That calculation is very difficult to defend. The medical event explanation is supported by a pattern of evidence that predates the current crisis, and that Israeli media, operating under significant military censorship provisions that expand dramatically during active conflict, has been unable to report fully. Netanyahu is 74 years old. He has a documented history of cardiac issues, including a procedure conducted in 2023 that his office described as a pacemaker implantation, though the specific medical details were never fully disclosed. He has been operating under conditions of extreme stress for an uninterrupted period of over 18 months. A conflict that has consumed his government, produced the most severe domestic political crisis of his career, and required a level of personal involvement in operational military decision-making that has no precedent in modern Israeli governance. The physiological toll of sustained extreme stress on a 74-year-old with a documented cardiac history is not a matter of speculation. It is a straightforward medical calculation. What remains speculative is whether the toll has reached the point of acute incapacitation, and the 47-second video, whatever it actually shows, has given that speculation a visual anchor around which 40 million people have organized their concern. The security explanation, that Netanyahu's location and status are being concealed as a force protection measure, is the one that Western intelligence agencies are reportedly taking most seriously in their private assessments. And it deserves the most careful examination because its implications extend far beyond Netanyahu personally. Iran's military doctrine, as articulated in IRGC operational planning documents that have been partially disclosed through intelligence sharing between Western agencies, has always included a leadership decapitation component alongside its conventional military strike packages. The logic is straightforward: removing or incapacitating the decision-maker who authorized the strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure, who directed the operations that destroyed Hezbollah's command structure in Lebanon, and who has been the central figure of Israeli military policy for the last 2 years, would produce a period of Israeli political and military paralysis that Iran could exploit operationally. Hezbollah assassinated Israeli military figures during the 2006 conflict. The IRGC has conducted assassination operations against Iranian dissidents across Europe and North America with a frequency and boldness that Western intelligence agencies have found alarming. The idea that Iran would not target Netanyahu directly in the current environment, when it has already struck an American aircraft carrier and attacked Saudi Aramco, requires assuming a restraint that the operational record does not support. Here is what Israeli constitutional and political procedure requires in the event that the Prime Minister is incapacitated, whether temporarily or permanently. Under Israeli basic law, if the Prime Minister is unable to perform his functions, the role passes temporarily to the designated acting Prime Minister, currently Minister Yoav Gallant, who also holds the defense portfolio and has been one of the central figures in the current conflict's military decision-making. If Gallant is unavailable or also incapacitated, the role passes to the next designated minister in the succession order established by the government. The War Cabinet, which has been the primary decision-making body for all military operations since the conflict began, has the legal authority to continue operating and making operational decisions, regardless of the Prime Minister's status, as long as a quorum of its designated members is available and functioning. What Israeli law does not have, what no democratic system has in a clean and unambiguous form, is a procedure that addresses the specific scenario of a wartime prime minister whose status is unknown, whose condition is the subject of viral speculation across global social media, and whose government has chosen not to clarify the situation for a period now exceeding 72 hours. The legal machinery functions. The political and strategic damage of the uncertainty accumulates independently of whether the legal machinery is functioning. The domestic political dimension of Netanyahu's disappearance from public view adds a layer of complexity that international observers frequently underestimate. Israeli domestic politics, even in wartime, even under military censorship provisions, even with an active multi-front military conflict consuming the country's attention and resources, has not stopped. Netanyahu's governing coalition is the most ideologically heterogeneous and internally fractious in Israeli history, held together primarily by the personal political survival calculus of its component parties, rather than by genuine policy alignment. The ultra-nationalist and ultra-Orthodox coalition partners who provide Netanyahu's parliamentary majority have their own agendas, their own institutional interests, and their own relationships with the military and security establishment that operate independently of Netanyahu's personal authority. In a period of 72 hours of prime ministerial absence, the internal coalition dynamics, the conversations happening between party leaders, between ministers, between faction heads and their parliamentary supporters, do not pause. They accelerate. Because every political actor in Jerusalem understands that the question of who leads Israel through the resolution of this conflict, and who therefore gets credit for the outcome, is the question that will define Israeli politics for a decade. The international intelligence community's assessment of the Netanyahu situation is, by the standards of a normally opaque community, unusually visible in its concern. 3 separate Western intelligence services have, through the indirect channels by which intelligence agencies communicate publicly without formal attribution, indicated to journalists covering the story that they are actively seeking to verify Netanyahu's status through sources independent of official Israeli government communications. This is not standard procedure. When a close ally's leader is healthy, mobile, and conducting government business normally, allied intelligence services do not need to seek independent verification. They know because the normal channels of diplomatic and intelligence communication provide continuous confirmation. The fact that allied intelligence services are actively trying to independently verify the Israeli Prime Minister's status means that the normal channels have not provided that confirmation. That is the clearest signal available from the intelligence community that the official Israeli silence is not a communication strategy. It is a genuine information gap that is being treated as an operational concern. What does any of this mean for the trajectory of the conflict? Here is the answer that nobody in an official position is currently willing to state directly, but that the strategic logic of the situation makes unavoidable. The Israeli-Iranian conflict has reached a phase where every decision made in the next 72 hours about whether to respond to the forward strike, about whether to continue operations in Lebanon, about whether to accept or reject the ceasefire framework that Qatar and Oman are actively working to broker, requires a functioning Israeli decision-maker with the political authority, the coalition support, and the personal credibility to make commitments that will hold. A government led by an acting prime minister operating under emergency wartime provisions, managing a fractious coalition whose component parties will immediately begin positioning for the post-Netanyahu political landscape the moment his absence becomes acknowledged, is not a government that can make those commitments with the confidence that they will be honored. Iran's leadership understands this. Washington understands this. Every government in the region understands this. And the 40 million people who have watched a 47-second video on Telegram understand, at some level, that the question they are asking is not really about one man's health. It is about whether the entity making the decisions that are reshaping the Middle East is still functioning. 72 hours of silence is not an answer. It is the question, repeated in every language, growing louder by the hour.